Something just came out of Brazil that SB19's international fanbase should not scroll past. It is not an official booking. It is not a confirmation. It is something smaller and, honestly, more interesting, a name showing up in exactly the kind of coverage that tends to arrive before the real announcement does. Welcome back to Stage Wire. Today we're breaking down what was actually written, where it came from, and why the timing of all this might matter more than the mention itself. Let's start with what is confirmed, because there's a lot of noise around this story and very little of it is officially locked in. Lollapalooza Brazil 2027 is set for March 19th through 21 at the Autódromo de Interlagos in São Paulo, the same racetrack venue that has hosted the festival since it first landed in Brazil back in 2012. This upcoming edition marks 15 years of Lollapalooza in the country, and organizers are treating it as a milestone year. Pre-sale for the Lollapass, the ticket tier that covers all 3 festival days, opened on August 4th through Ticketmaster Brazil, and it opened just days after Lollapalooza Chicago 2026 wrapped its own 4-day run. The earliest ticket tier, Lolla Lovers, had already sold out before a single artist name was made official. People are buying passes to a festival whose lineup does not exist yet. That alone tells you how much trust this brand has built with Brazilian audiences. So where does SB19 come in? A Brazilian entertainment outlet that closely covers festival and pop culture published a recap of Lollapalooza Chicago 2026 time to that pre-sale launch. And it's worth being precise about what the piece actually said, because the original framing floating around online has stretched it. The article's biggest highlights were the Chicago moments everyone was already talking about: Charli XCX and Lorde sharing a stage for Girl. So confusing, Olivia Rodrigo's surprise appearance during the Smashing Pumpkins set, and Charli XCX's own performance pulling one of the largest crowds of the entire festival. Separately, in the same piece, the outlet pointed to a different group of names: Somber, Slater, SB19, Cordis, Espa, Bibadoobie, and Hot Mulligan as proof that Lollapalooza continues to function as a launchpad for the newest generation of global talent. That's the actual sentence SB19 appears in. Not a prediction of a Brazil booking. Not a leaked lineup. A recognition, alongside 6 other rising acts, that Lollapalooza gave them a real stage in front of a massive audience in 2026. That distinction matters, and Stage Wire isn't going to blur it just to make the story bigger than it is. SB19 has not been announced for Lollapalooza Brazil 2027. Nobody has. The lineup hasn't dropped. But being named in that sentence, at that moment, next to those particular artists, is still worth paying attention to because of what it says about how SB19 is now being talked about outside the Philippines. Here's the part that gives this story its weight. SB19 didn't just attend Lollapalooza Chicago 2026, they used it. On day 1 of the festival, SB19 performed Lawless, a song that had been released only hours earlier. It was the first time the group had ever performed it live, in front of a Lollapalooza crowd, mid-festival, with essentially no rehearsal runway. That's not a safe move. That's a group betting on themselves in front of one of the biggest live audiences in the world, and it paid off enough to get them folded into a next generation of global music conversation by outside media weeks later. That performance builds directly on what SB19 has been doing all year. They've appeared on the Grammy Museum's Global Spin Live series. They made history as the first homegrown Filipino act to perform at Lollapalooza's flagship Chicago edition. And they've been doing all of this as an independent act, built through their own label, 1Z Entertainment, without the machinery of a major international label behind them. Every one of those data points feeds into the same question. Is P-pop actually building the kind of global footprint that K-pop built over the last decade? SB19 keeps handing people evidence that the answer is yes. Now, about the fan side of this story, because Brazilian audiences are clearly paying attention to Lollapalooza's next chapter. The festival ran its own social media poll asking fans which Chicago 2026 acts they most want to see land in São Paulo. The 9 most requested names that came back were Charli XCX, Jenny, Olivia Dean, Tate McRae, The Neighborhood, Somber, Adele, Jade, and Slater. SB19 wasn't on that specific wishlist, and we're not going to pretend otherwise. What SB19 does have is something a little different: recognition from the press itself, sitting inside coverage about the festival's own identity as a global talent showcase. Those are two separate kinds of momentum, and both are useful for an act trying to break into a new market. One tells you what the audience wants. The other tells you what the industry is starting to notice. So why does Brazil specifically matter for SB19's international story? Brazil isn't a small stop to check off a list. It's one of the largest live music markets in the world, with a fan base that has repeatedly shown it will embrace international acts across genres and languages: pop, K-pop, rock, everything. Lollapalooza Brazil alone drew more than 240,000 attendees in its most recent edition, and organizers expect that number to grow again in 2027. If SB19 ever does perform on that stage, they're not walking into a curious-eyed crowd. They're walking into one of the most engaged festival audiences on the planet, most of whom have likely never heard a P-pop track in their life. That's exactly the kind of exposure that turns into searches, streams, and new fans within days, not months. It's the same mechanism that's been building SB19's audience outside the Philippines this entire year, one unfamiliar crowd at a time, one performance that people didn't expect to like as much as they did. What happens next is simple, even if the waiting isn't. Lollapalooza Brazil's organizers have said their booking team is already closing names for the 2027 lineup, working from headliners down to the smaller stage acts. There's no confirmed date yet for when the full lineup drops, but based on past years, an announcement typically lands in the months following the pre-sale window, which means fans may not be waiting until March to find out whether SB19's name shows up on the actual poster. Here's what we know for certain right now. Lollapalooza Brazil 2027 is locked in for March 19th to 21st at Interlagos. Tickets are already moving before a single name is confirmed. Chicago's 2026 edition put SB19 inside a conversation about the future of global pop, in print, next to acts most casual fans haven't discovered yet. And nothing beyond that is official. Everything else, whether SB19 actually lands in São Paulo, whether that Lollapalooza wristband ever says their name, is still ahead of us. But if it does happen, think about what that moment actually represents. Not just one group getting a bigger stage, but another data point proving that a Filipino act can walk into one of the world's biggest festival brands and hold its own. Every time that happens, it gets a little easier for the next artist behind them to imagine doing the same thing. So keep an eye on this one. If SB19's name keeps surfacing in Brazilian coverage as the lineup process moves forward, this stops being a maybe and starts becoming a story with real momentum behind it. That's where we're leaving it for now. Nothing confirmed, but clearly something shifting. If you want to stay ahead of this story as it develops, make sure you're subscribed to StageWire with notifications turned on, because the moment there's real movement on this lineup, we'll be breaking it down here first. And if you think SB19 belongs on that Lollapalooza Brazil stage, drop it in the comments. We want to know if you think a set in São Paulo could top what they just did in Chicago.